My name is Alexa Scholl, and I'm running for Prescott City Council. And I'm running for City Council because I feel that it's time for someone new and young with fresh ideas to be on our council, and I feel that there's no better person than myself to be the fresh perspective that our council needs. I moved here with my family just 2 weeks after I was born, returning to the town where my grandfather actually grew up. He grew up on a chicken farm here in the area, and when I was 8 or 9, he actually did some genealogy, and we discovered that my family is a direct descendant of George Reed, who's a founding father. Are you guys getting bad feedback? Yeah. Try standing up. Is that any better? Good? Okay. Anyway, I was saying my family did some genealogy, and we're direct descendants of George Reed, who was a founding father who signed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And he was also admitted to the Philadelphia bar at only age 19 and began practicing law. And that's the age I am today. So I feel that civic duty is in my blood. And then I graduated from Prescott High School in 2015, and I currently commute 2 days a week down to ASU, where I study political science and Spanish. And so what I would like to propose to council in 2018 is an intensive education campaign on water conservation to educate our citizens on what they can do, easy little fixes at home, just changing their habits to conserve water before we really make any drastic changes to our city codes or require them to spend a lot of money to conserve water. So through social media, partnerships with our local schools, as well as partnerships with organizations like CWAG, I feel that we could really educate our population on easy ways to conserve water to ensure our water future.
My name is Connie Cantelme. I'm also running for City Council on the premise of my strengths. So I've been here back in Arizona in 1972. My father was in the Air Force. He retired here in Prescott. I've been back about 13 and a half years now. I moved right back downtown into the historic areas when I came back. So I started to look around and realized that the town was getting a little tattered around the edges, and I started my foray into the renovation of some of these important structures in the downtown area. My past has been 35 years. I started a construction company back in the early 80s, so I've run a very successful design-build company. One of my attributes that I learned from my company was thinking outside of the box and problem solving, and that's what I hope to bring to the council, because I do think this water issue is not going to be one silver bullet that's going to solve this thing as we go into the future. I think we're going to have people on the council, as Alexa says, with vision and the ability to kind of think outside of the box. So that's what I'd like to be able to bring to the council, but along with that, I think I can offer something by way of the economic development issue that we have. I think I can definitely offer something for the preservation of our jewel that we call our historic downtown Prescott. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jean Wilcox, and I'm presently on the City Council. I was elected in 2013. And I was elected with the highest number of votes of any of the candidates running for office in that year, which said to me that people in Prescott were looking for a different perspective, not someone who was a member of the good old boys, someone who lived elsewhere and had seen other successful solutions to problems, some of which Prescott faces today. I think experience on the City Council should be a requirement for serving as mayor because it's a tremendously educational experience to learn the operations of the city, go through the budget process, and I've gone through 4 budget cycles now, and to get to know who the people are, not only who have direct involvement with the city, but those who work within the city and the experienced staff that we have. The 2 measures that I would like to see happen in 2018 are, one, a rainwater harvesting ordinance that requires new development to install rainwater harvesting infrastructure. Secondly, a change in our rate increase system so that the rates go way up during the landscaping watering months, because that's when our consumption is the greatest and we have the greatest amount of waste. Thank you.
My name is Greg Mengarelli, and I'm running for mayor. We came to town in 1995, my wife and I fell in love with Prescott, and we've been here 22 years, and it's been a real pleasure and honor to be a part of this community. We're raising 9 children in town, so it's been a very beneficial experience from our end of things, benefiting from all the great things that Prescott has to offer our family. I've had an opportunity to run a business in town at United Christian Youth Camp, where we've seen some great growth from a $400,000 revenue to now $4 million revenue, and so it's been very humbling for me to have the business community help me with that endeavor, and so I'm grateful again for Prescott and what they've given me. And so it's all those experiences and opportunities that I've had living here that I really want to make sure we preserve and enhance for future residents of Prescott. And I think water is very important, and it's obvious with the kind of support you have here and what CWAG does. I'm grateful for their work in our community in bringing awareness about water issues. And I'm grateful for this opportunity today to really focus on water. So thank you for having us. In terms of initiatives, I really would like to continue down this road with conservation. I think we've just started some great opportunities, and there's a lot more to uncover in terms of conservation. And I would be for more education with conservation. I think there's a lot more we can do. We know that 27% of our usage is just from outdoor irrigation type uses, and I think there's a lot we can do to reduce that with conservation efforts, as well as what Lexa was saying about just our habits internally in our homes. There's a lot of people that really don't know the opportunities that exist, as well as new developments, just making sure that we implement those conservation efforts on the front end. So thank you for having me.
Good morning. I want to thank CWAG for putting this on, and thank all of you for showing up. It is a beautiful day, so you could probably be outside gardening or anything else. I came to Prescott over 15 years ago, and I've done a lot of work behind the scenes for issues important to Prescott. And considering the mailers I've had out recently, I probably should be staying behind the scenes. I have worked hard for this town, and I hope to continue to work hard for this town. It is important that we continue to have a vision for the future, and water is part of that. So I think CWAG has played an important part with educating this town, because even though our population has grown, our water use has actually dropped. And I believe the tiered water rates have played a part in that, but I also think this group has really done a marvelous job. You've been the one voice in this town that has really educated all the new residents. That they come into different areas across the country that really had no idea what water plays a part in our town. So I personally, because of my view of government, I do not believe in mandatory anything as far as forcing new developers to do anything. But I think that what this group does so well is educate. So I do not plan to force ordinances on anything, but I think with the tiered water rates and affecting people's pocketbooks, when they see the water rates jump when they come in here, trust me, they shut off the water spigot.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Viccica, and I'm running for Prescott City Council. And I just want to say thank you all for coming here today. I think that the education of CWAG is crucial to the future of Prescott, and seeing all of you here is an indication of that, so thank you. I'm from Pennsylvania originally, was in banking when I was out there. My father was a police officer. I came to Prescott so I could attend Embry-Riddle. I have a pilot's license now, and have noticed that we're not trying to keep young people in town. We've sent so many out the door. Embry-Riddle has its largest graduating class ever. We kept 2% of the students. Going away parties once every 2 months for me, and I got sick of seeing it, and that's why I decided to run. Now, what's so crucial to that, and towards any sort of development, is water. I think before we look towards, and I know these are part of the questions we're about to get, but before we look towards expansion, we should focus on conservation. When I bought my house 4 years ago, there were a lot of things I didn't even know existed, like the rebate program that we had here in Prescott, which is for rain barrels, for your watering system outside, for low flow toilets, for shower heads, things that I all replaced, but a lot of people may not know about, and that might be an indication of something that they would like to do for themselves. So one of the things I want to suggest is that we expand that program and focus on education to make sure people understand that. We need to advertise that program, and I think that could go a long way. We've seen it in places like Las Vegas, where though they grew pretty substantially, they also focused on conservation in all their hotels, and it did help. So we can do those things. I'm super excited to be here, guys. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Phil Goode, a candidate for Prescott City Council, and thank all of you for coming. And it's great to see so many people that have such a concern for water resource management as I do. I'm retired after a 35-year career in senior healthcare management. I hold a bachelor's degree in biological sciences with a minor in chemistry. I've had a very long-term concern for environmental protection going back to my college days as a member of the Nature Conservancy and the Sierra Club. But balanced with a respect for private property rights and a focus on well-managed, very modest growth concerns here in the city. I currently serve as a commissioner on the Planning and Zoning Commission for the city, co-chairman of the Mayor's Ad Hoc Committee on Sober Living Rehab Homes, and I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the Central Yavapai Hospital District. So you can see I'm very committed to the quality of life that we enjoy in the city. As an early advisor to Mayor Harry Oberg, I've been studying water resource management here in the city for the past several years. I'm in my second year as a CWAG member and joined the CWAG Education and Public Policy Committee last year. I've also monitored the city's Water Issues Committee and the Upper Verde River Water Protection Coalition. That's a mouthful. I think the city of Prescott has done a very laudable job reducing per capita water use over the last 10 years, mostly through tiered water rates and education, but much more can be done. Steeper tiering of water rates, seasonal tiered water rates, more effective incentives for water harvesting, water smart construction guidelines, and zero-scaping for existing water and new customers, I think should all be implemented in the city. For long-term resource water management, we should consider the creation for a regional water authority so we can have our neighboring towns and county cooperate for long-term solutions to a dwindling water supply while protecting the riparian habitat for the Verde River. Thank you.
Thank you all for those introductions.
Moving to some of the questions now. If you look around town, you notice there aren't any production wells within the city. All of our water comes from groundwater. It's all piped in, and that's been historically true for many, many years. So as we look to the future, the city has been considering, and is talking almost exclusively, about building a pipeline from northwest of the town of Paulden and importing water from the Big Chino aquifer. This would increase our water supply for the future. However, before the Big Chino pipeline project proceeds any further, because it's going to cost hundreds of $millions to do this, should the city hire a consultant to prepare a comprehensive study of potential alternative water sources, which would include aggressive conservation, potable reuse of effluent, stormwater collection, and extensive rainwater harvesting, or maybe something we haven't even thought of yet. So we'd like to have your thoughts on how we move forward in a constructive manner. Let's start on the opposite side,
Since we put Alexa on the spot the first time, Mr. Goode.
Thank you, Doctor. I think hiring a consultant at this time is simply premature. Until the Salt River Project study is completed and we have a clear understanding of the recommendations and restrictions that we'll be dealing with before we can seriously start to look at a project for a pipeline and its requirements for mitigation. This, you have to understand, will be a very long-term project. A project of this scope and cost is going to take quite a few years to really get well planned. In the meantime, I would agree that all those considerations for more conservation and more aggressive management of our water resources through xeriscaping and rainwater harvesting can all be done, and we can have a very significant impact between now and the conclusion or the beginning of this project.
Thank you. Mr. Viccica.
So I know probably most of the people in this room know this, but we've been in water mining since 1998, and we have until 2025 to solve the issue of water mining in the Prescott AMA. And as far as having a paid consultant, that could not be a terrible idea. It may cost the city some money, but we could find ways to start proactively making these conservation efforts into the future. So by 2025, we could already start that process. Now, the cost is part of the issue. You know, we don't have a ton of money in our general fund right now with the money that we're paying for PSPRS. I think that's also an important consideration to have. But yeah, I think that having a paid consultant could be a great idea for the city.
Thank you. Ms. Hrin.
I'm concerned about the cost for yet another study, and I agree with Phil. The ADWR in the fourth management plan was very clear that we will need to supplement our water supply through the Big Chino Water Project. And that's clear. We are also legally entitled to that water. The legislature made that clear as well. So let's just let this study be completed through SRP with Prescott Valley and Prescott. And my other concern is even putting out that the stormwater runoff collection, you're going to run into surface water rights. So before we even kind of put that out there, we have to really be clear about water rights in the state to even put that out there, that we can continue to do that or even start to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Mengarelli.
Well, with the Big Chino and the pipeline, we know that because of Prop 400, that would be a referendum for us voters to look at, which I think is a very good thing when we get to that point. But backing up to your question, I think ADWR has already done this study that Mary Beth mentioned, which is this fourth management plan back in 2014. I think there's some good findings there. I also think it's premature because of what SRP is doing with this study right now. We need to see what that modeling and monitoring uncovers, and so I'd be interested to see what that brings to the table, and then at that point we'll see what might be in front of us and make a decision at that point. But I think it's a little premature to do a consultant at this time.
Thank you. Ms. Wilcox.
Thank you. The Big Chino Sub-Basin water study is currently in progress, and I think it should continue so that we can better understand the water flow model and whether or not mitigation efforts, whatever they might be, will prevent depletion of the water basin in the upper Verde River area. However, I think that what really needs to happen is the right people be elected to the council to create a policy, direct staff to look at all of the measures that we should take first and put a first priority on potential alternative water sources, including aggressive conservation, potable reuse of effluent, stormwater runoff. I don't think we've really explored all of those alternatives, and that's what we should do first. I think we have competent and adequate staff to do that. They just need the direction from the city council.
Thank you. Ms. Cantelme.
I agree with Jean on that. I think we do need to wait to see what this study bears. But I also believe that we can never know too much. I think through organizations like CWAG, again, having more of an open mind and being able to think clearly out of the box. If I were a council member, I would be very open to exploring all those things. But remember, one person on the city council has their hands tied a little bit. I think a lot of this, what we can do today, would be educate the public about conservation. I know in my building company, we used to offer landscape packages. And I remember for one of my attorney clients who was also a researcher, I did a study on the money that he would save by doing synthetic grass and low-use water plants in his yard. And it was amazing how much money that he saved on the water usage, not to mention the landscaping bill every month. It was something like a $12,000 saving to go xeriscaping. Now those are the things that we actually can do today. So I would propose that, and I think it's educational. We can't make anybody do that, but through education on the city's part, I think it would be very helpful to concentrate on that.
Thank you. Ms. Scholl.
I would support a consultation project before the Big Chino pipeline project proceeds any further. However, I would like to see the city possibly look at, instead of hiring an outside consultant, to look within its own, within the city and figure out how we could capitalize on the people who are already on our payroll, and then also use organizations like CWAG to assist, that way that we can keep it local and include, do a public-private partnership to help with this consultation project. I think there are ways that we could do it while being fiscally conservative.
Thank you all. Any comments regarding each other's comments? No debate? All right, well, if we're all in agreement. Ed, you want to pose a short question?
Yes. So, the Verde River.
The last major perennial river in Arizona provides numerous recreational and environmental benefits, including habitat for endangered species, as well as 40% of Phoenix's water. The current long-term study of the hydrological relationship between the Big Chino Aquifer and the Upper Verde River is being undertaken by the Salt River Project, Prescott Valley, and the City of Prescott to determine if implementation of the Big Chino Pipeline project will require mitigation to prevent reduction in stream flow. If the results of the study establish that the pipeline project will reduce the flow in the Upper Verde River, will you support a plan that will prevent the reduction, even if that protection doubles or triples the cost of the project? And I guess we'll ask Ms. Scholl to do double duty, and we'll go back in this direction.
We'll start down there.
I would support a plan that protects the Upper Verde River. The environmental and economic benefits of the Verde River not only affect the Verde Valley, but they also affect Prescott. A lot of tourists come here, stay here, spend their money here so that they can go to the Verde River. So it is incredibly important that we protect the Verde. I think that the construction of the pipeline is so far down the road that I can't say for certain if I could support a plan that doubles or triples the cost. I think that would be beyond my time on council. However, I will do everything I can now and during my time on council to protect the Upper Verde River.
Well, hypothetically, if this study comes back, whatever the report is, I think we probably all take it seriously. I know I would. My first concern would be the environment and the Verde. If the study comes back and the costs have been tripled as we go down, it would just take a little longer to implement whatever the study outcome is. The cost would not have any bearing on me because remember, we're not talking about everything tomorrow. This is for the survival of the Verde going on into the future for our children as well. So no, cost would have no bearing for me. The study, though, I would definitely take that very seriously. But again, being open-minded, I'd like to see that we do several different things that would impact this decision. It's not going to be one silver bullet. I think it's going to be several things.
Simple answer to your question is yes. We have to be realistic. We must sustain our water supply, and I think we should protect the Upper Verde River water basin. Mitigation from water taken from the Big Chino will cost more than any of us want to pay. We'll have to do it through water rate increases, and hopefully there will be federal or state monies available to provide assistance and support for building our pipeline. But we don't know that for sure. At any rate, it is far more important that we have a sustainable water supply. We live in a desert, and we have to accept that.
Well, the Verde River is very important. We need to make sure we protect that, so the study would be very important to me as well. I think we need to look at all downwater users. So whether it's at the Upper Verde River watershed that supplies the headwaters, or whether it's any other downwater users, we need to look at all of those different users along the river to make sure that we are making sure that they're not abusing water usage along the way. I think the Upper Verde is a pretty small percentage when you look at the whole that actually makes it to Camp Verde as well as then on down to Maricopa. And so I would be interested in us really looking at all downwater users and trying to figure out how we can reduce their use.
Jean made an excellent point, and that's that we need this water. And the pipeline is right now the only legally available supply to our community. That's a reality. And here's the stark reality, because this is the agreement that Prescott Valley, that we have with SRP, and I'm going to read from it. It says that we will mitigate such impact proportionally to the extent of the effect of their combined withdrawals. So we have the duty to mitigate our impact to the Verde. Here's my concern that I feel a lot of times coming to the meetings with some members here, that they want to stop at all costs this pipeline being built. If that pipeline cannot be built or will not be built because there are people dead set on stopping that pipeline, please let me finish. We have some time here, I think. Prescott and Prescott Valley will walk away from that ranch. That ranch will be sold. And guess what? See this agreement, the duty to mitigate? That goes away. That next developer will not mitigate the impact. So I think it's important that people work together and really keep the Verde, because we have the duty to mitigate our impact. So I think it's important that we work together to really save the Verde.
I'm not sure how many of you have ever been on the Clarkdale train that runs up through the Upper Verde River, but it is a beautiful experience. I saw 5 bald eagles when I was up there myself. I mean, it's spectacular. And it's an important part of our local economy here. A lot of people come to Prescott, they'll stay here, they'll go over to the Verde Valley, they'll hike, they'll fish, they'll go through the Clarkdale train. It's super important to our economy here in Prescott. So when we're talking about the pipeline and maybe mitigating the risks that are associated with it, I'm also advocating for, let's wait to see what the study brings back. Before we have a $300 million project, upwards of $300 million, we should make sure we understand every bit of it before we're asking the citizens for, and it is going to come to you for a vote, for any sort of money like that.
Well, once the Salt River project study is completed, and we know for sure that we're required to mitigate this project, then we'll know for sure what our costs are going to be. But there's no question there are going to be big costs. But the situation is, for water resources and recreational opportunities, protecting the Verde River, there are a lot of people, there's a lot of communities that are going to be stakeholders in this issue. And that's why I think it's really important that we seriously look at a water resource authority being formed. You know, we're growing too big, our communities are so closely connected that the time for fighting against each other because one community gets more benefits than another is over. If we have a authority that can have the ability to create cooperation, build partners, whether they're state or private, then that's going to be necessary to really deal with a project of this scope.
Thank you all. Any rebuttals or comments anybody like to make? Ms. Wilcox.
Thank you. I would like to point out that it is the city of Prescott that owns the Big Chino Water Ranch. So the primary responsibility falls on the city council, to determine what will happen to that ranch. There are a lot of other straws that suck up water in the aquifers that we are using. Prescott Valley, City of Prescott, Chino Valley, all the agricultural users, and all the individual lots around the aquifer. So we do have to work together, but it is really the city's responsibility to make sure that that study is completed, and we share in the cost of the study with Salt River Project and Prescott Valley. So it's not really a Salt River Project study. It is our study. And we need the science-based facts in order to make good decisions about our water supply.
Ms. Hrin?
And Jean's right, but it's also important to know that there are 200,000 acres that sit above the Big Chino subbasin. And developers will come. And I think it's important not just to look at the next 10 years. We have to look at this area more than just beyond when we're here. We just can't just look at preventing just Prescott and Prescott Valley and what they're going to do with the pipeline. We really have to think beyond ourselves and really look at what's going to happen with that area, because developers will come. And so we really have to start to look at long range of what we're going to do, because they're outside the AMA and people know about exempt wells and developers coming in there. So it's just not Prescott and Prescott Valley that are going to impact the Big Chino subbasin.
I'd like to make a comment that that's going to really become a county issue, because there's tens of thousands of houses
proposed at this point up there in the Big Chino. And we don't know how that's going to be modeled in this SRP plan that's coming. So it's not only Prescott Valley who are going to be drawing this water, but there's lots of other people that are going to come into this picture. Any other comments?
Well, I would just reinforce that. When you realize that Maricopa is drawing about 30% of their water from the Verde River, they're going to be big players and they're going to have big influence. And they're going to be able to influence the state. So we've got the county, we've got these communities, we've got Maricopa, we've got the state involved. We have to have a broader authority that can bring these partners together and come up with a legitimate plan that we can start working on instead of studying it to death.
Any other comments? Maybe we'll come back to some of this in the end. Let's move, just to get through our agenda here, to questions.
This has been touched on before, but outdoor landscaping uses 27% of Prescott's water annually, which means it's much more during the summer. This is water lost to evaporation and can't be recycled. So far, the city has been quite successful in promoting conservation, but CWAG has identified the potential for even greater savings through cost-effective conservation measures. Would you support changes to landscaping and construction guidelines that would result in additional water conservation? Let's start with Joe Viccica.
Go around.
Sure. So I'm looking at water conservation, and I said that was one of the things I think we need to focus more on. For landscaping, my house is zero-scape right now, and it looks pretty nice, I would dare to say. But we should be focusing on that. I don't think we should mandate necessarily everybody be zero-scape. I don't think that's where we should be yet. But it should definitely be an option going forward. We shouldn't take it off the table.
Very happy you stressed the word guidelines. Of course I would support that. And with my philosophy in government, I'm really reluctant to force anybody to do anything. And that's what I think, again, I've stressed before. This organization has been invaluable to this community. And I am very grateful that you've done so much in education. And with the tiered water rates, when people get their bill and they see that it goes up, the more water they use, the higher their bill. But my concern is if we go beyond guidelines and it becomes regulation. What happened in California when they had the mandatory drought restrictions, and Governor Brown was actually encouraging his neighbors to rat out his other neighbor if they were watering their lawn at the wrong hours. I mean, heaven forbid, I do not want to see our town turn into the water Nazis. So that's why guidelines are fine with me.
Yeah, I think our current land development code and our current measures do a good job in deterring water usage. I would be in favor of guidelines, more education, just making sure people know what's available and what's possible. And so I'd like to take a more positive approach. I'd also just again like to say, as so many have, but I think CWAG and the city and that partnership have done a great job educating the public. But I think there's more people that could be involved in that and don't understand what's available to them in terms of conservation measures.
Currently, the city of Prescott, like many other cities and towns in the country, has a land development code. We have building codes, we have fire codes, we have all kinds of codes, and we have one code enforcement officer. People have come to accept those kinds of codes as a means of protecting our public health and safety. We can have the same attitude toward water conservation codes. And I support enacting stricter water conservation codes, requiring rainwater harvesting infrastructure and low water features in all plumbing. I think that with enforcement and public education, we can get people to change their behavior and their understanding about how precious water is. Water isn't free, and neither is gold.
I agree with Jean on that. I probably would be opposed a little bit to mandating it at this point, although I'm not naive enough to think that in the future it may come to that. But for now, I am a big proponent of pay to play. If you want to have 2 acres full of grass, you're going to pay for it. And I would incentivize these landowners or the property owners downtown to become part of the xeriscaping. I've seen it work. You can still have that lush, beautiful green look. They've come so far with synthetic grass. Some of the synthetic grass they've made today, you can't even tell the difference. So again, through education, creativity, incentivize the people to get on board with the water usage problem. And if it takes the city breaking down the savings in some sort of a generic form, I would be in favor of that too, because I'm going to tell you, when I educated this attorney I was telling you about, I was surprised myself at the savings. And there's so many layers of savings involved in that. So again, it's going to be about education. I'm not in favor of mandating it at this point, but through education and incentivizing, I think it can happen.
I would support stricter landscaping and construction guidelines for all new builds. With any new growth, we need to be prioritizing conservation. I would, like I mentioned before, would like to see an education campaign before we start mandating any new guidelines on existing homes. I think there's a lot of things we could be doing to just change the habits of residents here that we'd see major impact in water conservation. I'd also like to see, Prescott Valley has started doing this, interactive water meters, which transmit up-to-date information to an online database so that water users can be monitoring their water usage throughout the month and see when they're using more water, or maybe they suspect they have a leak. They can know right then and change their habits and their behavior to conserve more water. So I'd like to see the city start transitioning to those types of water meters.
Cycling back, Mr. Goode.
Thank you, Doctor. Again, I believe in well-designed incentives. I've used incentives throughout my professional career, and I know they work, rather than government-dictated requirements. Xeriscaping for new and existing new construction should be highly encouraged, with much steeper tiered water rates for those who wish to recreate some lush lawns from their previous residences. We live in a desert, and we need to appreciate the value of quality xeriscaping. Supporting rainwater harvesting and using water smart low use fixtures, I think, can be encouraged additionally. We currently have a rainwater harvesting rebate program in the city. It's been in effect for 9 years. We have 21,300 water customers here in the city, and over the 9 years, we've had 52 people apply for this program. The city decided to increase the rebates from 10 cents a gallon to 50 cents a gallon, but nobody ever found out about it. So the last 4 years with this increase, we've had an average of 1 person per year sign up for this. So this just shows you that if we communicate and we educate the public, there are a lot of things that will be done to improve our conservation.
Thank you. Any other comments coming back?
I'd like to ask that. Phil's right. One of the things that I'm not sure if everybody's aware of it, because we don't have too many of the planned developments up here in Prescott, but having been a builder in Phoenix, a lot of these water issues are mandated in terms of the code. So, for example, you are required to have a low-flow toilet. You are required at this point to have low-flow fixtures. The other part of the landscaping thing, many HOAs and CCNRs now are building that in. You've got to have a mixture of 30% grass, 30% rock, and this is just, hypothetical, but so that we are going a long way to that. We just don't have a lot of that right now in Prescott. Although the lakes, I'm sure that they have very stringent CCNRs that concern the water usage. So things are happening, and you're right, they had overestimated how much allotment of water per residence, and they've now corrected that. And Craig McConnell down at the City Hall or City Council said that they're even considering lowering it more for next year. So we are going a long way to that, but again, we just have to stay on top of it.
Any other comments?
I just quickly wanted to mention that when we are talking about landscaping and construction guidelines, we do approach the issue of private property rights. And so it will take some creative, outside of the box thinking to really balance water conservation with private property rights. And so that's something that our council constantly needs to be thinking about and remembering, that people do have rights with their private property, but also people have rights to know that they will have water coming out of their faucet. So just something that we need to keep in mind.
Anybody else?
Okay. The last question.
In order to cover the significant costs of maintaining or replacing aging water and sewer infrastructure, the City of Prescott will soon need to substantially increase water rates. If water rates go up, what can be done to ensure that the new rates are affordable for those residents who are already having a difficult time paying their utility bills? In particular, what do you think about applying most of any increase to the heaviest water users, thus keeping the base rate affordable? And just to follow the last kind of
Cycle, let's start with Ms. Hrin.
Well, we do have the tiered water rates. I think they are working well. I think it does address the financial needs of the families, addresses conservation needs of the community, and certainly incentives for landscaping uses. I think the council is addressing how to deal with our aging infrastructure, and I think that might have to be addressed, the new council, because I think how that was supposed to be financed, it wasn't quite clear to council. I think the rate and how it was going to affect the financing of that. So I think the new council is going to have to revisit that and how it's affecting the water rate. So that's another issue for a future council to deal with.
I agree. I think the current progressive water rates already do this. I think in terms of the aging infrastructure, bonds will probably be implemented for future needs. And I would consider the cost-benefit analysis at that time when we approach those with those bonds. And I think, that's probably the most equitable way of paying for those improvements on aging infrastructure.
Well, I agree also that we can use bonds and take out WIFA loans at low interest rates and pay back those loans by lesser increases in our water rates. But we also need to look at dramatically increasing the rate at the fourth, maybe a fifth tier. So the more you use, the more you pay. And look at things like incentives for automatic shut-off valves on faucets and shower heads, requiring xeriscaping and having stricter code enforcement for water leaks. For example, I have a neighbor up the hill from me who just lets his irrigation line leak year after year. And I went to talk to him and he said, "Oh, it's okay, I'll pay for it." Well, we do have a system of reporting water leaks, and we do have an enforcement mechanism, but again, we only have one code enforcement officer, and we need more code enforcement.
I agree with Jean on that last part. We do need more code enforcement. But getting back to water rates, I do think, again, it's a pay-to-play thing. If you're going to use a lot of water, you're going to have to pay for it. The other part of it, though, for the low income, I think that does need to be taken into effect. They probably need to produce what their income is, and we're going to have a chart in some way to be able to discover. But it can't be abused either. You can't have a family that's in a low income category. We get they're watering 3 acres of grass. So, some of this is going to have to be looked at, and it'll have to be mandated through some kind of enforcement, unfortunately.
I agree that that those who are using the most water should be paying more. However, I think there are some issues with that system, because you could have a low-income family who, say, had a leak in their house they didn't know about, and then all of a sudden their water bill could be monstrous and they can't afford it. So I would support possibly something where it has to be 2 or 3 consistently months in a row before their water rates increase, so that they do have time to take care of any accidental leaks or something like that. Because I think, if we just all of a sudden their water bill is outrageous and they can't pay it, that could negatively affect them.
Mr. Goode?
Well, by state statute, we can't create a profit when we're delivering these utilities. But I think steeper water rates for high users can be offset by reducing costs for the low-end users, the conservers, the people who use little water, and they're usually the people that may have the financial challenges. So setting a better rate structure, I think, could achieve those goals. Speaking for myself, I monitor my water rates pretty closely, and I was noticing that my rates and my usage had gone up dramatically. So I got a plumber out there, and we started digging around, and we found a pretty significant leak that wasn't detectable on the surface. But by getting that corrected, I cut my rate by 50% over the last 2 months. So this is the kind of thing that we could flag in our bills so that people would recognize that they have a problem, and then find out a way to improve it. And that could be significant with 21,000 users.
I think Phil's right, and Gene also said water isn't free, and that's the case. Water isn't free. We could probably mitigate some of that for the most vulnerable customers by offsetting it with use for the higher customers. When you drive down the street and you see that there's a huge stream of water coming from a lawn that's kind of just dripping down into the culvert, it's not a great thing, especially when we're looking to conserve in so many different ways. By increasing the rates for the highest users, we're also probably discouraging some of the worst water usage types of industries. We keep talking about high tech and bringing high tech into Prescott, but something like silicone chip manufacturers can use a whole lot of water. So, we could mitigate some of those effects by understanding and making sure that we're working with some of the highest rate users.
Any questions from the panel? Ms. Wilcox?
Just one thing I wanted to add about the changes in the water allocation system made by the council this year. Instead of assuming that there would be a 0.1 acre foot consumption of water by businesses and industries related to all the water allocations for residential use, the council decided to actually measure the actual use of water by business and industry. And then next year we'll take a look at a rate structure for business and industry. And I think that may help relieve the cost for the lowest income segments of our community.
Anyone else?
We're moving right along. Not much dissent up here. Looks good. We have some questions from the audience.
Wait a minute. I submitted a question to somebody First question that I have here is, do you accept the 5 essential water facts as they were stated in the 7/27/17 Talk of the Town article in the Courier? Yes or no? I don't have that here to...
Do you remember what would the author like to repeat those so we can all be on the same page here? Candidates should know 5 essential water facts. Courier. 1. We continue to withdraw more water from the Little Chino aquifer than nature is putting back. What are we going to do about that? The Big Chino pipeline, in conjunction with Prescott and Salt River, is engaged in research
fact. U.S. Geological Survey and other studies have already shown the proposed pumping will have a negative impact. And I must say, I'm a hydrologist and my model agrees with that.
We know that. We don't need to wait for SRP. There are other alternatives to the pipeline out there.
This is just not my, this is this comment. Should we be moving forward on that? 3 of the 5 is good to start with. I don't want to overwhelm us. Do we have any comments? I'll take them as.
Anybody who can't tell me?
I'll start with that one. I agree with all of that, and I agree that the pipeline is probably going to be an ultimate issue that we are going to have to deal with, and it's probably going to come through. But again, I'd like to explore, in conjunction with that, some of the other alternative means of getting the water. Reusing water, what they're calling down at the city the alternative water use, collection basins. Let me give you an example. So again, as a builder, I've restored many, many homes in the downtown area. These homes were built back in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. We have had to go back now on 2 of them and install second sump pumps because the water table down in the city right now is so high, it's coming up through the concrete. I know of 2 other commercial buildings down there that have flooded as well, including the 3 homes where we've installed new sump pumps and more efficient and larger sump pumps because of the amount of water. So I was talking to an old timer who had lived there forever, and he said, yeah, we've had more groundwater coming up through than he's seen in 40 years. And I'm wondering to myself, why can't we figure out a way to harness that and keep that and store that water? I think these are things that we have to look at. This is cyclical. Another thing is, another proof is I've got an 80-year-old apple tree in my backyard. The 5 years I've lived in that home has never borne apples until this year. It is amazing to me how much water is coming up through the ground in the downtown area. And I think anybody can attest to that lives down there. So we do have alternative things out there. We have to discover them. We've got to harness it. And we've got to educate and present it to the council and staff so they'll be able to guide us in the way that we need to go.
I'm going to back up to the question as it was asked, where they've asked for yes or no's. So let me pose them, not picking on you.
Yes, I agree with that.
One at a time.
Do we need to really attack and worry about safe yield? The ADWR Forest Management Plan gives us till 2025 to get there. All in favor of putting that as a high priority, please just raise your hand.
Any no's?
Well, let me make a comment on that because you know I support that, but the problem is that the safe yield requirement has no teeth in it. We can achieve it or not, and it doesn't have any type of financial or penalty attached to it. So I think the city of Prescott has done really a laudable job reducing per capita use significantly over the last 10 years, but we've got communities around us that could care less about that. So there needs to be some teeth put into that requirement so that all of our communities are doing what they should be doing, like the city of Prescott has been doing, so that we'll have a better chance of actually achieving safe yield.
I think we've addressed most of these other questions, so I'm not going to pursue the rest of this, but Ms. Cantelme did raise the issue, and I'm going to go
off topic here basically. There's a concept in high tech going out there called direct potable reuse. Many cities throughout the country and many more throughout the world are basically recycling in a closed loop their used water. That would drastically cut down our need to pipe this water in. It's going to need study, and it's going to take a long time. Do we want to move forward with such a high-tech study? Or again, are we going to wait till the SRP report comes out and then be behind the 8 ball when they start demanding a vote for a $200 million bond issue? Anybody want to comment?
So I'll comment. And I said at the start that I'm looking to be proactive in this. I think we should be proactive. Even though there is no repercussions if we don't meet safe yield by 2025, we should be looking for ways to continue increasing our conservation efforts and making sure that we have water into the future. It's part of our development. It's part of what our community is going to look like into the future. And that's what I want to say. So yes, I think we should be looking at these efforts.
Ms. Wilcox.
I think we should be studying those direct potable reuse systems. One concern that a lot of people have expressed is, what do we do about the medicinals that are in our water system? Is there an effective way to filter those out? So what we need to do is look at how other cities in this country and around the world have managed to filter out those, if they are.
Ms. Cantelme.
Just real quickly, again, having grown up for many years in Europe, they actually have self-flushing toilets. We don't have them available to us in the country here. I have been around some of these systems in Europe, and these houses are self-contained. So we, as far as the city paying for studies, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can actually go out and look at some of these tried and true alternatives. They exist out there, but we have to be open-minded enough to accept that research and the cost of it, by the way. I did put a self-mulching toilet in a client's house one time who wanted a pool house out behind his pool, and there was no way to get a sewer in there. The only drawback to that, it was actually a nice-looking unit. It worked. It did smell a little bit, but we could probably figure out a way with gaskets to prevent that too.
Any other comments? Scholl.
I absolutely support any sort of alternative ideas to help with our water issue. Again, it all comes back to being creative and thinking outside of the box, and looking into water recycling is absolutely something I'd be on board with, at least trying to figure out if it's something that would work for our community, and looking at other communities who have done it, talking to them, and figuring out if that's something that would work for Prescott.
Ms. Hrin.
I think we just need a good researcher. I think there's a lot of people around the world that are facing water shortages. Israel, Saudi Arabia, people in the desert. To think that we're going to put finding this problem on the shoulders of our little town of 40,000 people, I think is asking a little bit much for this town, that we're going to find the solution for water of the world. So that's my concern. So I just think we need to look at our conservation and the education that you do, but to really put the onus on our residents, I think is asking a little too much.
Well, I kind of agree with that in general. I think government exists to provide essential services, and we really don't have the resources, nor should we in principle be experimenting. But I'm not at all adverse to looking at other communities that have looked at these, have implemented these, and have had some track record that shows they're effective. Israel's a great example of a country that's been able to blossom using the most advanced water conservation and resource management projects in the world. So we could look at them. I think Tucson's done a pretty laudable job of handling their water demands down there too. So there's a lot of places that we can look and we can copy, but not necessarily experiment.
Mengarelli.
Well, I would be open to this kind of idea. I think the advancement in technology is probably going to get to the point where this is really possible. It'll really be a cost-benefit analysis that I'd look at to make sure that it's worth what we'd have to spend to get that done.
CWAG has been advocating that we hire a consultant to look at all these things.
In the first go-round, most of you, and I don't want to pick on anybody particular right now, said you thought it was premature to engage a consultant. Any reconsideration of that?
Are you going to pay for the consultant?
Somebody has to. Pay now, pay later.
I'm all for it if CWAG's paying for it.
All right, moving ahead.
Yeah, so we have a series of questions all around the same.
I would like to go back to the one fact that said the hydrological study absolutely showed that we are already draining the headwaters. One of the facts from that article, and you already concurred with it. Yes. Could you please reread that fact, please?
three. It's basically two anyway. Impacting from the Big Tree and around the Upper Verde. In fact, the U.S. Geological Survey and other studies have already shown that proposed pumping will have a negative impact on the Verde River.
Okay, I would like to comment on that. CWAG sponsored a very wonderful film. It was Arizona Groundwater Act, and it was at the Elks Theater. And I can't remember the gentleman's name. He heads, I believe, ADWR. Tom Bishatsi. Okay. I remember him very clearly stating to your audience that those hydrological studies modeling was incomplete, and that did not show that, and that is why the modeling study had to be redone with the SRP, Prescott and Prescott Valley. And he said that to your whole audience that was there. So it did not show that it was impacting the Verde.
Well, it is and it does, but it can be done better. I think that's the point I would personally agree with.
Well, that's why that study is being done now, because the modeling was incomplete and did not show anything. You could not unequivocally state what you just stated.
So shall we go on to another? We've gotten several questions that all
go around the same topic, and I'm going to read two of them just to frame it. So one of them is, do we have to plan for a huge development? Why can't we plan for maintenance or existing needs and environmental viability? And the other one that really expresses the same sentiment is, why isn't a stronger growth management plan a consideration in your water mitigation plan? So any takers on that one?
Ms. Hrin.
If this is in reference to the Deep Well Ranch, if that was someone's question.
I'm sure it is.
Okay. I agree with the premise, because I really would like to see infill in the city, because that happens in all the cities, and it is a shame we have some wonderful lots and different neighborhoods that I wish, and I know Ms. Cantelme is a big advocate of this, is to revitalize portions of our city. So I am a strong advocate of that as well. With the Deep Well Ranch, and this is the bottom line, Mr. James, that is his private property, and he can and will build houses on it. I know some people have said to me, well, that's open space. Well, that is his private property, and if the city did not annex that, what he will do would be he could put 2-acre lots. If anybody has been out to Williamson Valley, and what I see, in my personal opinion, is horrific development. You see just helter-skelter development. People sink their wells and septic systems, and that's what would have happened if the city did not annex this land. If the city did not annex it, Mr. James is going to build houses anyway, except it would not be a planned area development in which we would get the effluent back with his development. It may not satisfy that answer, but at least we could get that, which is so important to our water portfolio. So it is better to have a planned development than for him just to sink wells, and that in that case, that person could pump 24/7. And that I think no one wants, is to have these wildcat subdivisions of what's going on in Williamson Valley. And I know from doing the Williamson Valley Corridor Plan, the older developments, their wells are sinking, and their water rates are, the pumping, now they have to all now dig wells, because the newer developments, their wells are deeper, there's no oversight, and these people, the older residents, they can't afford to redig these wells. And that's what happens when you just have these wells and no plans. So you may not agree with the development, but at least there is a plan for it.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that too. I've had these kind of discussions as well with a lot of people that are concerned about the water in particular. And I have to remind people, we still live in America. It's still the land of the free. When you introduce a planned development like is being introduced out there at Deep Well Ranch, We have imposed legally as much as we can impose on that development today with what the laws that we have in place. We can't go any further. We're not, Nazi Germany here. So we have to work with these people. The other thing I have to remind people is we came here and other people are coming here too. So what we need to do is be proactive to do what we can legally do to manage this situation, not reactive. So in an attempt to be proactive in those planned developments, we have instituted every law that we can make them march to. Now, I was in council when Steve Blair asked the developer to consider rainwater harvesting, and I believe he's going to do that. So, these are the things that we can suggest, but we cannot mandate it. So working within, what we have available to us, we've got to get on board and realize that this development is going to come. It's going to be a 30 to 50 year build out according to the paper article that I wrote. But we do have to learn how to manage this, but it's going to have to be done legally, and it's going to have to be studied. So this study, when it comes in, I think is going to tell us a lot.
Well, I agree with a lot of what Mary Beth said. I would add to that it is far better to have development within our City of Prescott system. Ideally, it would be wonderful if everybody in the groundwater management area were in the same provider system so that we could recycle all of what we use and use that to recharge the aquifer or recycle it into a potable system once we develop that technology. I have to remind you that we do have a general plan that was approved by the voters in 2015, and that plan shows not only the land use layout of what could happen, what may happen if a property owner wishes to apply for some kind of subdivision development or planned area development, but it also has goals and strategies which we should follow and we need to follow. So this Deepwell Ranch development is not a surprise, and it's actually quite innovative in that the developers are designing it so that it has a mix of uses. They're concentrated. They are giving up agricultural wells and putting those into the city's portfolio, which is a significant addition to our portfolio. So it's not as though all these new developments are sucking up new alternative water. We have to remember that they bring in water too, and they also provide open space and a lot of other amenities.
Anyone else?
Just for some context, I know it can be disconcerting when you see 10,000 homes coming in and you think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a huge influx. Prescott Lakes development started 25 years ago. There were 3,000 homes proposed, and that one is still not done. And so I think it's a good perspective for us that this is a very long-range project. It's going to take a lot of years, probably decades. And so that's kind of helpful, at least for me, to not get too concerned about 10,000 homes being here next year.
Can I comment also?
Yes.
We have to realize that we're on the end of the baby boom. Those born between 47 and 62 are part of that big bulge, and the 62 birth year boomers are just turning 55. So we have to kind of have a longer term vision. This notion that if we're not growing, we're dying, I don't think is legitimate here. We are a retirement community for the most part. Look around the room. But this continued pressure for growth, I think, is going to start being reduced. So in the meantime, we really do have to take a close look at how we manage this growth. The state took away our ability to charge impact fees for these big planned area developments, but they impact our ability to provide services, both police and fire and other services to these communities that are on the periphery of the city. We can grow our population just on infill buildable lots almost 50%. So we just need to refocus where we're going to support and create our incentives for growth into more infill and less of these planned area developments. I think very, very modest growth numbers of 1 to 2% are achievable and will have the least impact on traffic and congestion. So it really comes down to where we want our future to be. And I've seen the city time and again reference the fact that our general plan was overwhelmingly approved by the voters of over 80%. Can I see a show of hands of how many people in this room actually read a 128-page general plan? Less than 5%. So pay attention, show up to council meetings, and make your voice heard. Thank you.
I think Phil raises an issue that maybe we should come back, certainly at the council level. I've heard
3-4% growth rates talked about going forward. What can the city council do, if anything, to keep our growth rates manageable, to keep up with things?
Can I respond to
Tell
that
me.
too?
Yeah.
Here's the problem with that analogy, the 3 to 4, is we don't have the product. We literally don't have the product, unfortunately. The housing market, especially in the downtown area, I've seen that go up by 40% in the last few years. People are buying, let me give you an example, a house across the street from me, 1,300 square feet of 1957 vintage crap, basically. $330,000 it just sold for cash, and it was bid up. So, you can see what's going to happen here, but we just don't have the product to give them. So I think what Phil said is probably more realistic because we do not have the product. It's going to slow it down and drive the cost up, by the way.
Ms. Wilcox.
I think the greatest growth control we have is our water allocation system. The council can allocate only so many water acre feet per year, and that limits our growth right there. I don't know where the 3 to 4% figure comes from, but historically it's hovered between 1 and 2% in the last 10 years.
And I just want to say, I was actually going to talk about the allocation of our water class. And that is a method that we can use to determine how we grow going forward. We don't have the same type of construction towards residential growth that we used to have. We're not getting as much income from it. I think our future really is towards economic growth, towards bringing in companies and retaining young people here. I know that we consider ourselves a retirement community, and I want to retire here as well. But we're so much more than a retirement community, and it hasn't always been a retirement community. So I think as we focus on starting the retaining of younger people, that's going to slow some of the growth as well from going from all these retirement homes, all of these larger, more expensive developments. We're going to see smaller growth.
So here's another question. I
suggest that we not get in an argument about the first part of this question that sets the stage, but just hypothetically accept it. And that the statement is, the Big Chino pipeline will be out of question financially, so how can we limit development and conserve?
What are we going to do if the pipeline doesn't work out?
In other words, how will we manage it?
So as I'm going to take this, as I have been saying, I think we need to focus on conservation. We need to focus on making sure people understand and education for some of the programs we already have in the city of Prescott. And I know that I'm reiterating that there, but not necessarily, and I want to say that I'm not in favor of the pipeline as it stands right now, but Prescott Valley does own some of the water rights and would go in with us on construction for the pipeline. So, we're having a hard time finding $80 million for PSPRS. We're going to have a hard time finding $150 million for Prescott, but it's not totally out of the books.
Ms. Wilcox.
Well, right now, the future water supply that is part of our water allocation system includes the Big Chino pipeline. If we take that out of the question, we do have to redo our allocation system, which means there will be many fewer water allocations granted each year, and that in itself will be a strong growth control.
Ms. Cantelme.
as hard as it is to envision this, but that will take a natural course. If you can envision a society where we have a moratorium on growth, and we only have so many homes, so much water allocated, and the only way you can get into Prescott is if somebody decides to sell their house. I mean, that's exactly why we're doing all these studies, I think, is to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. It may though, you never know. And I'm talking, 100 years or whatever down the road. But that would be the natural correction to stop the growth here. There'd be a moratorium on people moving in here if that were to happen.
Yes.
If the Big Chino pipeline becomes unrealistic financially, I think our council will have to seriously look at starting to mandate conservation efforts. I think that would be a critical time where we would have to, desperate times call for desperate measures. However, I think that is quite a few years down the road and not something that we would have to be too concerned about now. But in the meantime, I think we should be proactive in looking for alternative water sources so that we can be prepared if something like that happened.
Well, I think it's clearly logical that without the ability to bring water in, we would be limited on our growth significantly. We would have to have much more aggressive conservation measures to maintain and even support even a minimal amount of growth. But we're talking about really many, many years in the future, and we are seeing some pretty rapid advancements in desalination technology. Not that it would directly impact us, but it would certainly impact the coastal regions, so their demand for Colorado River water might be reduced, and that might give us an opportunity to acquire more of that water for Arizona use. So we're really kind of projecting our thoughts into the distant future, and it's amazing how quickly technology advances. I always remark on the fact that my grandfather saw Red Cloud, the last great Sioux war chief, on the Oklahoma reservation and lived to see a man on the moon. So I think we're even going to experience more than that.
Ms. Hrin.
I know you said to ignore this, but it's how much would you pay for a bottle of water when you're really thirsty? Because I know we go to places and some kind of event and you see someone walking around and it's $5 for a bottle of water and you're like, oh my gosh. But you fork over a bottle of water, or you fork over the $5 because you're really thirsty. And that person was smart enough to be lugging a cooler of water around and selling it that day. So the very premise that the pipeline is going to be cost prohibitive, right now, that is the only realistic way when the time comes to bring water to this area. Any other avenue that exists is way more expensive than the pipeline. And that really is something that we need to think about.
I am optimistic, believe it or not, question. It says that there are water-neutral building happening around the world. What can we do to encourage such development? The definition is builders provide water conservation measures equal to the water usage of the new development. So it doesn't have to be your own little plant in your own house, but think of it as the community.
I think we can encourage water neutral building or different types of conservation efforts through incentive programs. I think that's really where we can capitalize on trying to get people to be more water conscious now and when they're building new facilities. So I think really we should be looking into incentive programs and how to use them.
Cantelme.
I agree with that. I think it's going to be all about incentivize. I saw a PBS special not too long ago on a hotel in Dubai. Did anybody see that about the water conservation and about the fact that it was a neutral? They basically recycled, I think, 95% of everything that came out of that hotel, but it was at a very, very high cost. Now, we can do that, but we can't mandate that at this point. So it'd be, again, it's all about education. I think CWAG could play a big part in that and research this stuff if the city can't afford to pay the the professionals to do it. So come forward with it. If I'm on city council, I'll look at it.
Well, I think that just reinforced my previous statement that there are a lot of things we can do today, and that's based upon better conservation, better water usage, technology that we currently have, while these innovations are implemented and advanced, so that in the future, I think, as water is such a precious commodity that it is, our ability to come up with creative new technology solutions will occur, and we should be able to adopt those and implement them so that we have a sustainable future.
There's a concept, and I may be wrong on this, that new growth
Should pay for new growth. However, I believe the legislature is tying our hands by limiting impact fee. What does that figure into all this?
Well, I think if we limit the ability for developers to build these big planned area developments, then maybe they will go back to the legislature and take the handcuffs off. Because I think new growth should pay for itself, and we should have the right to charge these new growth developments for the services that they're going to require. So if we can limit that growth to a point where the developers aren't making as much money as they'd like, then maybe they'll see it's in their best interest to make some changes.
Tell me.
I want to respond to that, having been part of that world. The impact fees, by the way, that movement started in an attempt to keep costs of the home down. So because the premise was only the elite could then afford to buy these homes. So that's how that went around. And there is a lot of valid thought in that process. As a developer, in order to comply with all the building codes, the energy codes, now the impact fees, an average 2,000 square foot home would no longer be in the 300s, it'd probably be more in the 600,000 range. So, those are all things that have got to be considered when you're talking about impact fees. Although again, I am a pay-to-play person, I would be all about that. But it's very exclusionary, and that's where we have to, kind of watch that whole premise.
I agree with Connie on that one. If impact fees are reauthorized by the legislature for all the things that we used to have. Thanks, Greg. If impact fees were reauthorized by the legislature for all the things that we used to have them for, only the wealthy would be able to afford new development. And we have heard so many times in the course of campaigning and while I'm on the council that this community needs more affordable housing. Why should we ghettoize people in a low income bracket to be living only in the older sections of the city? To me, that just isn't right. They should enjoy the ability to experience a new house, a good quality house, without having to pay the added impact fee. So somewhere there has to be a balance. If we do have those impact fees, we know they get passed on to the customer, the buyer, but we also have to have some kind of affordable housing program in Prescott.
Ms. Hrin.
Jean's right. There's tons and tons of area of the law. It's called, and it has to do with the term exclusionary zoning. And that's because exactly what Jean was talking about. Cities and towns have done that, and they've tried to, by the very virtue of having just very wealthy enclaves, to not have those people come and live in this community. And I think if you take a look around at this room, how we all are white, and just look at this. Look what Prescott's become. So, and I think we come very close to that. So it is important that we become an open community and welcome to everyone and have affordable housing. And I think very strongly about that. So when we do talk about this impact fees, and to be able to, we want a workforce in here, but are they ever going to be able to afford to live here? So it's important to have all these things and, not shut people out. So you know, Connie and Jean make some very valid points on all this.
So I have another question here, which really goes on a
different tack, but I think it's an important one. And I'd like to ask Phil Goode to start. The question is there a separate water board or commission that can be the water authority other than the city council? If not, why not? And you've already touched on that. Maybe you would elaborate about.
I would say elaborate about, is it a realistic potential if we want to?
Well, it would require some legislation. From my understanding, we had one attempt for such an authority to be formed in southern Arizona that didn't work out too well. But there are a lot of examples of water authorities throughout the West that have been formed and have been effective. So the question is, how do we create one that's going to be effective for our area? And I've just seen each community make decisions time and again that if it doesn't benefit them, then they don't want to support it. And from a political perspective, the people making those decisions are afraid to make decisions that might not give them the benefit of the impact of the decision. So by creating authority, it allows some of our local community politicians to make decisions or allow decisions to be made that are in the best interest of the broader community. So yes, it would require some state approval to have that done, but I think in the long run, we've seen that continuing to have individual community decisions is not going to solve this bigger problem, and we're going to need a different type of organization to do so.
Anyone else?
Yes, Viccica. So I consider Prescott pretty good stewards of our water. But you can look over to Prescott Valley, you can look at Chino Valley and see some of the growth that they're doing and some of the uncontrolled water usage that they have out there. I think that a water authority would be actually a very good idea for the city. However, we have to be really careful with making sure that the people that get on the board are not people that are big players in water or that can control all of the development for our whole area. But absolutely, I think making sure Prescott Valley and Chino Valley are also part of this water conservation effort is crucially important.
Ms. Cantelme.
I wanted to kind of back up a little bit and talk about the funding of this, the proposed pipeline, if I could. And it's kind of a question as well. The ADWR, it says right here, in 1994, the city of Scottsdale purchases Prescott's and the tribe's CAP allocations. The funds are held in a trust fund by the ADWR to be used for future water acquisition costs by Prescott and on behalf of the tribe. Does anybody know how much money is in that trust fund? And the question that I have is, wouldn't that be put with the money, the cost to bring the pipeline in? My understanding is that the answer is yes on that.
Yes.
I briefly want to revisit the idea of a water authority. I would be in favor of looking into how we could create a regional water authority. Philosophically, I'm all about collaboration, working together, and water conservation is not just an issue here in Prescott, but it's an issue statewide and regionally. So if we could work together closer with our neighboring municipalities so that we can work together to create water solutions that work for all of us, I'd absolutely be in favor of figuring out how we could do that.
I would just like to throw in the thought that
I think addressing the issues of the Verde and the Big Chino, we really ought to contemplate, if we were to have a regional water authority, one of bigger geographic spread than just our local group of communities, because it really is a bigger problem. In fact, it really extends all the way to at least to the mouth of the Verde River, although essentially no one lives down below Camp Verde.
One more, maybe we should make this the last one. I didn't
Right. Our current mayor has said he supports a public-private partnership to finance the pipeline. What could that look like, And do you support the idea of public-private financing?
Scholl's got the fast.
I absolutely support any sort of collaboration, public-private partnerships, so that the burden is taken off of Prescott Valley and Prescott, and it will benefit our community as a whole. So I definitely agree that we should be looking for public-private partnerships to help us fund the Big Chino pipeline when it comes to that time.
Yeah, let's just go on down. I think that's something everybody may.
I'm in agreement with that as well, and I do think that that's going to have to be a change of a thought process here in Prescott. We do have to start thinking more regionally and on many issues. The airport's another one of those issues. So anytime we can get some help from the other players, the other users of this thing, we need to take it. We need to be open to those suggestions.
Ms. Wilcox, if her microphone works.
Testing. Public-private partnerships sound like a good idea, but as soon as you say private, that means that the entity wants a return on its investment. How will they get that? They're going to raise your water rates. So I'm very leery about privatizing public utilities. I've seen this happen, read about it in other communities where utilities were turned over to private companies because the infrastructure was in such bad shape, they needed an immediate fix. The private company came in and fixed the water lines and then turned around and raised water rates so high that people couldn't afford to live there anymore. So I would be very leery about who we partner with and how we're going to structure water rates. There needs to be strong oversight and control over the rating system.
Well, I think regional cooperation is going to be really important. Prescott Valley is going to be a big player at the table. When you talk about the Big Chino, they're going to be nearly half. And I think in terms of the public-private partnership, I would be in favor of that in terms of just a pipeline. I would want to make sure that the city of Prescott controls the actual water rights, that we don't give that up. But I do think it's a good vehicle in terms of the public-private partnership to get the pipeline done.
Ms. Hrin.
Well, Prescott and Prescott Valley will be the ones that are part of the agreement. Listen, you need good attorneys. When you write this agreement up with the private sector, you can put that in the agreement. It's just that simple. That whatever these other municipalities were and they got fleeced, they had lousy attorneys. That's just that simple. I mean, there's no way that you have an agreement where your water users can no longer afford to turn on their faucets. So the fact that private investors are willing to finance the pipeline, and there are private investors willing to finance this pipeline, it can be done. You just need good attorneys to make sure that the users of Prescott and Prescott Valley are protected.
Viccica.
I'm really impressed that you got my last name right, by the way. But I think everybody up here has made some really good points. I'm absolutely in favor of a public-private partnership. However, we have to be careful, as Jean had said, about how our water rates are going to be affected, how the rest of the city is going to be affected by that partnership. So good lawyers, I think, are also a very good point to make, just to make sure that we tackle every base if we're going to work with a private company, and Prescott Valley is going to be part of that deal.
Mr. Goode.
Well, the concept is good. When you have private partners, they're expecting a return on investment. So to try to source capital to build an expensive pipeline is a generally good idea as far as bringing private partners in, but I would not want them to be operators. I think when it comes to public utilities, we shouldn't be looking at a private partner to be making a profit off this. Our focus would be on the capital cost of building the pipeline, and with a return on investment for that building, at least we're having a very limited amount of a partnership period. If we did have such a water authority with a much broader geographical scope, then our access to bonding would be improved dramatically, because the number of people that would be paying back those bonds would be much larger, and we'd probably end up with better bonding at lower rates. So we could combine bonding with private investment for the building of it, but operating the water after the pipeline is built should certainly be a public requirement, so there's no speculation about making a profit.
Okay, I think it's time that we need to sort of wrap things up. Can we, if you'd like to go down the row again and give us a 1-minute
Conclusion summation of where you want to go if you're elected. Ms. Scholl.
Thank you again, everyone, for being here, and thank you, CWAG, for hosting this forum. Growing up in Arizona, water has always been something I've been learning about. One of my fondest memories in elementary school was the WET project that at that time was at the rodeo grounds, where you learn about the water cycle, water conservation. So, our students are learning about it in our schools, and I think that's really important, but it also needs to translate to our council and how we address our water issues moving forward. So I'm definitely someone who is willing to think outside the box, be creative, look at things that may normally not be looked at in terms of how we can conserve water. So I'm absolutely, someone who will be on board with water conservation in the coming years on our council.
Thank you. Ms. Cantelme.
Lexa has a leg up on all of us. If you're over the age of 40, we never had water conservation classes in school, did we? These young kids are learning about this at such a young rate that a lot of our problem with water usage when we all die off is going to be taken care of because they have the brains to be able to figure this out. So they do have a leg up. They're not going to be the problem. We are in terms of water usage. I think we started out early in our young age, water was just a given. We just all thought we were going to have everything we needed and always there. So we're the ones that have to change the mindset. So that gets back to my run for city council. Again, I feel like the part I'd like to play on the city council would be with an open mind to look at all the avenues, not only the water, but I do have some of my hot button issues here with the city, the economic development, raising the tax base downtown, preserving our history. The water is an issue. It's a big issue. So is the PSPRS. But we do have to kind of focus on our future too, and being able to adapt and bend with what needs to happen in the city and make those tough calls. I think I've got a lot of those qualities from running a construction company for 35 years, and I'd love to have the opportunity to go forward and be elected on the city council to try those out. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wilcox.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. I know taking a Saturday morning out is not always an easy thing to do, and I'm really pleased to see the number of people who've attended today. I think my experience on city council is a very valuable asset that I can bring to the office of mayor. I've learned so much about all the issues that the city faces, the challenges, how to solve them, and work towards solutions, who the people are, how the finances work. I think I'm in a better position to serve as mayor of Prescott than the other two candidates, frankly. Water is just one of many issues that we face. It's a complex one, and I can just tell you in 3 words, codes, conservation practice, and education will be continuing topics that I will push forward on the agenda of the council. I think we need to be very wary of jumping to the conclusion that the Big Chino pipeline is a must. There are many alternatives that we can look at before we get there. It may not even happen in Alexa's lifetime. And I'm hopeful that we can forestall that very expensive project as long as possible while we learn to live in the desert and learn to live with each other. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I would love to have the opportunity to be your next mayor. I would want to continue to work with CWAG. I think there's a great partnership with the city. I'd like to see that continue. I think there's a lot we can do together, particularly with conservation. We've got a great start, and I'd like to see that continue. And I appreciate what this group has done in our community for education, but I think there's a lot more that we can do together. And so I look forward to the opportunity to work with you. I think water is very important, and you've done a great job of helping us see that in our community. And I want to thank you for having me here today.
I'd like to reiterate all that. Thank you again, all of you, for showing up. I do always enjoy attending your meetings. but I will tell you, it cuts into my fabulous bike riding time, so this 10 to 12 is really tough for me. I would like to be your next mayor. I've worked real hard on some things, and I hope that as your mayor, we can solve the two things, which is solving our pension crisis and really bringing some economic development to the town, so we can really move forward and have a vision for the city. Thank you all for attending.
I also want to say thank you guys for taking your Saturday to come and talk about water. You know, you're probably the most educated group, because of CWAG, probably the most educated group of people in town here. So thank you. I just want to say that water conservation and solutions don't start tomorrow, they start today. And whatever happens in the next term or two will probably affect the way Prescott looks into the future for the next 100 years. It's important that I believe that we focus on conservation first and foremost. There's a lot of ways we can conserve water. There's a lot of programs that the city can offer. We should be focusing on those things before we go to look to expansion. The Upper Verde River, looking to the future as well, we want to make sure that the Upper Verde River is still flowing for our kids and our grandkids, my grandkids, and beyond. Thank you, guys.
Well, I graduated from college with my undergraduate degree in 1976. And my degree was in biological sciences, and conservation and ecology was something important to me then, and it's important to me now. I'm still in touch with my senior advisor, who's a botanist and ecologist, and we still communicate, keep up on things, but you'll notice that water conservation and water resource management was one of my top 4 goals when I decided to run for city council, and it will be in the future. So you can expect from me, I've got 35 years of working in senior healthcare management and being successful in a highly regulated environment. So if you're looking for well-researched, well-reasoned decision-making on the council, then I'm your guy. So I appreciate you all coming today, and humbly ask for your vote and support. Thank you.
On behalf of CWAG, thank you all for coming, and join me in thanking all the candidates.